Ambassador Daniel Price stood at the large window of his office, watching the last human transport ships lift off from the council station. The vessels moved slowly through the docking bay, their engines glowing blue against the darkness of space. 20 years. That was how long humanity had served on the Galactic Council. Now it was ending, not with anger or threats, but with quiet dignity. Daniel was 53 years old. His hair had turned gray during his time as ambassador. He had spent most of his adult life trying to build bridges between humanity and the hundreds of alien species that made up the Council. He had believed in the mission. He had believed that working together would make everyone stronger and safer. But belief alone could not fix a broken system. Behind him, his assistant Lisa Grant entered the office. She was a captain in the Human Defense Forces, assigned to protect the embassy and coordinate security. Lisa was 32, sharp-minded and completely loyal to the people she served. She carried a datapad in her hands. "The last civilian transport just cleared the station," Lisa said. "All human personnel are accounted for. We can leave whenever you're ready, sir." Daniel nodded but did not turn away from the window. "Have the council members responded to our notice?" "They have. Commander Vrax of the Zinthari wants to meet with you. He says it's urgent." "Of course he does." Daniel finally turned to face Lisa. "What about High Minister SThe? She sent a formal message asking you to reconsider. She says humanity is making a mistake." Daniel allowed himself a small, bitter smile. "A mistake? After 200 formal complaints, after every warning we gave them was ignored? After watching them dismiss our people as primitive deathworlders, she thinks we're making a mistake." Lisa shifted uncomfortably. She had been there for many of those meetings. She had watched the council members laugh when human scientists presented new medical technology. She had seen them roll their eyes when human military advisors warned about security threats. She had heard the whispers in the halls, the jokes about humans being too emotional, too aggressive, too young to understand galactic politics. "Do you want to meet with them?" Lisa asked. "Yes, one last time. I'll tell them face to face so there can be no confusion about why we're leaving." An hour later, Daniel walked into the council chambers. The room was enormous, designed to hold representatives from over 300 species. The ceiling stretched high above, covered in glowing panels that mimicked natural sunlight from a dozen different home worlds. Seats arranged in a circle allowed every member to see each other as equals, though Daniel had learned that some members were always more equal than others. Commander Vrax waited near the center. He was Zinthari, a species that looked like upright lizards covered in dark green scales. His people were warriors, respected throughout the galaxy for their military strength. Vrax had always treated humans with a mixture of curiosity and condescension, like a teacher watching young students try to solve a problem they didn't understand. Next to Vrax stood High Minister SThe of the Polonian people. She was tall and thin, with pale blue skin and large eyes that seemed to see everything. The Polonians were diplomats skilled at negotiation and compromise. SThe had been one of the few council members who occasionally listened to human concerns, though she rarely acted on them. "Ambassador Price," Vrax said, his voice rumbling deep in his chest. "We received your notice of withdrawal. Surely this is a negotiation tactic. Tell us what you want and we can discuss terms." Daniel stopped a few feet away from them. Lisa stood behind him, silent and watchful. "This is not a negotiation, Commander. Humanity is leaving the Council. We will maintain peaceful relations with all member species, but we will no longer participate in Council affairs." SThe stepped forward, her expression concerned. "Daniel, please. We can work through whatever problems have caused this. The Council values humanity's contributions." "Our contributions," Daniel repeated. "You mean the technology we shared that you called primitive? The military strategies you ignored until pirates started raiding your trade routes? The medical advances you dismissed because they came from a species you considered too young?" Vrax's scales rippled with irritation. "You are being emotional. This is why younger species struggle with galactic politics. You take offense too easily. We filed 217 formal complaints over the past 10 years, Daniel said, his voice calm but firm. Not once did the Council take action. Not once did anyone acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, we had valid concerns. You took our help when it was convenient and ignored us when it wasn't. The Council makes decisions for the good of all members, SThe said. Sometimes individual concerns must be set aside for the greater benefit. Whose benefit? Daniel asked. Not ours. Not the smaller species who get no voice in Council decisions. not the colonies on the rim who begged for protection, while you debated for months about whether it was cost-effective. He pulled out a data pad and set it on the nearest console. This contains all our active projects, all the technology we were developing for Council use, and all the intelligence we gathered about threats to Council space. Consider it our final contribution. We won't ask for payment or recognition. We're simply done. Vrax's eyes narrowed. You think you can survive without the Council's protection? Without access to our trade networks? We'll manage, Daniel said. Humanity is good at adapting. We've been doing it our entire history. You're making a mistake, SThe said, echoing her earlier message. In time, you'll realize you need us more than we need you. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. There was genuine concern in her eyes, but also certainty that she was right. That was the problem. The Council was so sure of their own importance, so convinced that they were the center of galactic civilization, that they couldn't imagine being wrong. Perhaps, Daniel said finally, but we're willing to take that chance. Goodbye, High Minister. Goodbye, Commander. He turned and walked toward the exit, Lisa following close behind. Neither of the Council members tried to stop them. As they made their way back to the last human ship, Lisa spoke quietly. Do you think they'll understand why we're really leaving? No, Daniel said. Not yet. They think we're running away. That we're too proud to accept our place in the galaxy. They don't realize we're leaving, because staying meant accepting disrespect as normal. It meant teaching our children that their ideas don't matter, that their voices won't be heard. Will they figure it out? Daniel paused at the airlock that led to their ship. Through the window, he could see Earth's blue surface in the distance, beautiful and welcoming. Eventually, when they realize what they've lost, when the problems start piling up and no one is there to help fix them, maybe then they'll ask themselves why we left. Maybe then they'll look at how they treated us. Lisa nodded. And if they don't? Then humanity moves forward without them. We've survived worse. They boarded the ship together. Within minutes, the engines powered up and the vessel pulled away from the Council station. Daniel took one last look at the massive structure floating in space, home to thousands of diplomats and bureaucrats who believed they held the future of the galaxy in their hands. Then he turned away and headed for the bridge. It was time to go home. 3 months passed since the last human ship left Council space. On the mining colony of Vexel Prime, engineer Torvin stood in front of a massive drilling machine that had stopped working. The machine was silent, its lights dark. Around him, a dozen Vexalian workers waited for answers they knew he could not give. Torvin was a specialist, trained in mining operations for 15 years. He knew the basics of drill maintenance, power systems, and safety protocols. But this machine was different. It used human technology, designed by Earth engineers who understood Death World mechanics. The systems were more complex, built to handle extreme conditions that normal equipment could not survive. Can you fix it? Asked Morvac, the site supervisor. He was a large Vexalian with gray skin and 3 eyes that blinked independently. I don't know, Torvin admitted. The diagnostic system is showing errors I've never seen before. The human engineers who installed this always handled the repairs. Contact them. They're gone. All of them left with their people. Morvac's 3 eyes blinked in frustration. Then use the manuals they left. Torvin had tried that. The manuals were thorough, written in clear language with detailed diagrams. But understanding the words and actually fixing the machine were 2 different things. The humans had made it look easy, finding problems quickly and solving them with tools that seemed simple in their hands. Without them, every repair took 3 times longer and half the time ended in failure. I'll try again, Torvin said, though he had little hope. Across the colony, the same scene repeated at 8 other drill sites. Production had dropped 40% in 3 months. The colony that once supplied raw materials to 12 systems now struggled to meet basic quotas. Every day, angry messages arrived from companies demanding their orders. Every day, the answers were the same. We're working on it. We need more time. But time was running out. On the Council station, Councillor Thane of the Arkelian species reviewed medical reports from the Outer Rim territories. The numbers were bad and getting worse. Hospital systems were collapsing. Mortality rates had jumped 15% in the last month alone. Thane was old, even by Arkelian standards. His people lived for 2 centuries, and he had spent 70 years in public service. He had seen problems come and go, crises that seemed impossible until they were solved. But this was different. The humans had been running medical training programs across Council space. Their doctors were skilled at handling complex cases that other species struggled with. They had brought new techniques, new medicines, new ways of thinking about treatment, and they had been teaching, patiently sharing knowledge with anyone willing to learn. Now they were gone, and the gaps in the medical system were showing. Emergency rooms filled with patients. Doctors worked double shifts and still could not keep up. Equipment broke down, and no one knew how to fix it. Procedures that had become routine suddenly seemed impossible without the humans who had developed them. Thane sent a message to the Council's main chamber, requesting an emergency session to discuss the medical crisis. He received a reply 3 days later, saying his concern had been noted and would be addressed when time allowed. He stared at the message, feeling something he rarely experienced: doubt. The Council had always worked slowly, taking time to consider all angles before making decisions. But slow decisions meant people were dying while bureaucrats debated. Meanwhile, on Earth, Director Helen Cruz sat in her office at the Global Space Administration headquarters. The building was in Geneva, overlooking the lake with mountains rising in the distance. Helen was 45, a former shuttle pilot who had moved into administration after an accident damaged her legs. She walked with a slight limp now, but her mind was as sharp as ever. On her desk sat reports from every human colony outside Council space. The news was good. Trade agreements with independent species were growing. New partnerships formed every week. Nations that the Council had ignored or exploited were eager to work with humans who offered fair terms and mutual respect. The colony on New Boston had doubled in size. Mining operations on the asteroid field near Centauri Station were ahead of schedule. The research facility on Darwin's World had made breakthroughs in agriculture that would feed millions. Humanity was not just surviving without the Council. They were thriving. Helen's assistant knocked on the door and entered. "Director, we've received another message from the Council. They're asking for help with pirate attacks along the Gamma trade route." "What kind of help?" "Military escort. They want our patrol ships to cover the gaps left by our withdrawal." Helen leaned back in her chair. "What did Ambassador Ross say?" "He filed the request without response, following the protocol you established." That protocol was simple. Until the Council acknowledged how they had treated humanity, Earth would maintain polite silence. No agreements, no assistance, no explanations. Just quiet distance. "Any other messages?" Helen asked. "Several trade requests from Council members. The Mirren want to buy medical equipment. The Keltorians are asking about engineering contracts. The Polonians want to discuss security partnerships. Private trade is fine as long as it goes through proper channels. But make sure everyone understands we're not rejoining the Council. This is business, not politics." The assistant nodded and left. Helen returned to her reports, but her mind wandered. She wondered how long it would take. How long before the Council realized what they had lost? How long before they understood that humanity's value was not in being useful servants, but in being equal partners? Back on the Council station, Commander Vrax reviewed security reports with growing anger. Pirate attacks had increased 300%. Trade ships were being raided weekly. Insurance costs had jumped so high that some companies stopped operating in Council space entirely. The problem was simple. Human patrol ships had covered vast areas of space, moving quickly and responding to threats before they grew serious. Their ships were fast, well-armed, and crewed by people who grew up on a death world where danger was normal. They did not hesitate. They did not need lengthy authorization before acting. They saw a threat, they dealt with it, they moved on. Council security forces were different. They were trained for defense, not rapid response. They followed protocols that required approval from multiple levels before engaging. By the time they arrived at an attack site, the pirates were usually gone. Vrax had argued for changing these protocols, for giving fleet commanders more authority to act. He had been overruled. The Council believed in careful deliberation, in making sure every action was properly justified and documented. Meanwhile, merchants died and trade networks crumbled. High Minister Sella called a meeting of senior council members. 20 representatives gathered in a private chamber away from public view. The mood was tense. "We need to address the situation," Sella said, getting straight to the point. "Production is down across multiple sectors. Medical systems are failing. Security is compromised. All because the humans left? Then contact them," said a Zinthari representative. "Offer them favorable terms to return. We tried. They don't respond. Offer better terms. You don't understand, Counselor Thane said quietly. This isn't about terms. This isn't a negotiation. The humans left because we disrespected them. Until we acknowledge that, they won't even talk to us. Acknowledge what? Vrax demanded. That they were offended. That they couldn't handle honest criticism? That we were wrong, Thane said, his voice firm. That we treated them as inferior when they were not. That we ignored their wisdom and mocked their concerns. That we took their help and gave nothing but contempt in return. The room fell silent. No one wanted to admit fault. The Council had existed for 1,000 years. They had guided galactic civilization through wars and peace. They were not wrong. They could not be wrong, but the evidence was everywhere. The empty chairs where human delegates once sat. The failing systems they once maintained. The security they once provided. Sela looked around the room at faces that showed worry, pride, and denial in equal measure. We need to decide how to proceed. Wait, Vrax said. They'll come back when they realize they need us. Or we address their concerns, Thane countered. The debate continued for hours with no resolution. Finally, Sela ended the meeting with a promise to consider all options. As everyone left, Counselor Thane stayed behind. He looked at the empty seats where humans once sat and wondered if pride would destroy everything the Council had built. He feared he already knew the answer. 6 months after humanity left the Council, the Zeltron Empire launched their attack. They came from the edge of known space, a fleet of warships that moved with precision and deadly intent. 3 border systems fell in the first week. The Council's defense forces scrambled to respond, but they were too slow, too scattered, too unprepared. High Minister Sela stood in the Council's war room, watching the tactical display with growing horror. Red markers showed Zeltron positions advancing deeper into Council territory. Blue markers representing Council forces moved to intercept, but there were not enough of them. Never enough. How did they get so close without detection? She demanded. General Korath of the Defense Command looked exhausted. He had not slept in 3 days. They used the blind spots in our sensor network, the areas the human patrol ships used to cover. Those words hung in the air like an accusation. The humans had warned about the Zeltron threat 5 years ago. They had proposed expanding the sensor network and increasing patrols along the border. The Council had rejected the proposal as too expensive and unnecessary. The Zeltrons had been quiet for decades. Why worry about an enemy that showed no signs of aggression? The humans had tried to explain. They understood predator behavior. They knew how hunters waited for the perfect moment to strike. But the Council had dismissed their concerns as paranoid thinking from a paranoid species. Now 3 systems were occupied. Millions of people displaced. Hundreds dead. What are our options? Sela asked. Korath highlighted several positions on the map. We can consolidate our forces here and here, try to hold the line at the Meridian system. But if the Zeltrons push through, we'll lose access to 6 more systems, including major trade hubs. How long can we hold? Unknown. The Zeltrons have weapons we've never seen before. Their ships are faster and better shielded than our intelligence suggested. Every engagement, we learn they're stronger than we thought. Commander Vrax entered the war room, his scales showing patterns of stress. I've called an emergency council session. We need to vote on requesting military assistance from humanity. No, said another voice. Councillor Prax of the Theronian people stepped forward. He was small, barely 4 feet tall, but his voice carried weight. Asking for help shows weakness. The Zeltrons will see it as confirmation that we cannot defend ourselves. We cannot defend ourselves, Vrax growled. Look at the display. We're losing. Then we fight harder, we adapt. We do not go begging to a species that abandoned us. Sela raised her hand for silence. Enough, we vote in 1 hour. Everyone prepare your arguments. The vote came exactly as she feared. Split down the middle. Half the council wanted to contact humanity immediately. The other half insisted they could handle the situation alone. In a tie, the default was to maintain the current course. No request would be sent. As the council members argued, Admiral Karen Lee watched the same tactical display from her office on New Boston Colony. The human settlement had grown into a small city, home to 50,000 people and a major naval base. Karen's fleet was stationed here, 12 warships ready to defend human interests anywhere in this sector. She was 50 years old, gray-haired and battle-hardened from 3 decades of military service. She had fought pirates, smugglers, and once a rogue AI that tried to take over a mining station, but she had never fought a full-scale war, and she hoped she never would. Her operations officer entered the room. Lieutenant Ben Shaw was 30, smart, and always calm under pressure. "Admiral, we're receiving distress calls from the Meridian system. Civilian ships are evacuating ahead of the Zeltron advance. Are any of them human?" "Negative. All Council citizens." Karen studied the map. Her ships could reach Meridian in 6 hours. They could escort the civilian ships to safety, maybe even hold off the Zeltrons long enough for people to escape. But she had strict orders from Earth. "Do not intervene in Council affairs. Defend human interests only. Keep monitoring," she said. "Alert me if any human ships enter the area." Ben hesitated. "Admiral, there are children on those civilian transports." "I know. We could save them." Karen looked at him, seeing the same conflict she felt. The same anger at having to choose between orders and conscience. "If we intervene, Earth loses credibility. We told the Council we were leaving. We told them we wouldn't fight their battles. If we rush in to save them now, it proves they were right to take us for granted. So we just watch people die. We follow orders and trust that our leaders know what they're doing." She did not sound convinced. In the Meridian system, the evacuation continued in chaos. Transport ships packed with refugees fled toward the jump points while Council warships tried to hold the line. The Zeltrons attacked methodically, destroying military targets and ignoring civilian vessels. They wanted territory, not genocide. But in war, the difference did not matter much to those caught in the middle. Among the refugees were the Mirren, a species that had joined the Council only 30 years ago. They were small, peaceful people with light blue skin and large eyes. Their homeworld was directly in the path of the Zeltron advance. They had no military, no warships, no way to defend themselves. A Mirren diplomat named Sola managed to send a message to Earth. It was simple and desperate. "Please help us. We are not part of your conflict with the Council. We are just people who need somewhere safe to go. If you can evacuate anyone, please come." Director Helen Cruz received the message in the middle of the night. She read it 3 times, then called an emergency meeting of the Human Leadership Council. 15 people gathered by video conference representing different regions and interests of humanity. "The Mirren are asking for help," Helen said. "Not military intervention, just evacuation for civilians." "That's still involvement," said Governor Raymond Ford from the Mars colony. "The Council will see it as us picking sides." "The Mirren are not the Council," countered Senator Patricia Vale from Earth. "They're innocent people about to be overrun by an invasion force. We have ships. We have space. We can help. And if the Zeltrons see it as hostile action?" Ford asked. "Then we explain we're conducting humanitarian rescue operations," Patricia said. "No weapons, no combat, just saving lives. If the Zeltrons attack civilian rescue ships, it shows the galaxy what kind of enemy they are." The debate went on for 2 hours. Finally, Helen called for a vote. The decision was close, but the majority agreed. Humanity would evacuate any Mirren who wanted to leave, but they would not fight the Council's war. Admiral Karen Lee received new orders at dawn. She was to take 5 transport ships to the Mirren homeworld and evacuate as many civilians as possible. No combat vessels, no engaging enemy forces, pure rescue operation. "Understood," Karen said, though she knew it would not be that simple. War was never simple. On the Council station, Councillor Thane learned about the human rescue mission from an intelligence report. He felt a mixture of relief and shame. Relief that someone was helping the Mirren, shame that it was not the Council stepping up to protect one of their own members. He sought out High Minister Sella in her private office. She looked older than when he had seen her last week, lines of stress deep around her eyes. "The humans are evacuating the Mirren," Thane said. "I know. Without asking our permission. Did we plan to evacuate them?" Sella looked away. "Resources are limited. We have to prioritize military operations. The Mirren are Council members. We swore to protect them, and we will by stopping the Zeltrons. That helps everyone. But not in time to save the Mirren homeworld." Thane sat down heavily. "We're failing them. Just like we failed the humans. That's different, is it? We ignored the humans when they warned us about threats. Now we're ignoring the Mirren when they beg for help. The only difference is the humans had enough strength to leave. The Mirren don't." Sella had no answer. She returned to reviewing military reports, searching for a solution that did not exist. Meanwhile, the Zeltron fleet advanced. Another system fell, then another. Refugees fled in waves. The Council forces retreated, trying to regroup for a defense they all knew was failing. Commander Vrax contacted Daniel Price directly through a secure channel. The retired ambassador was at his home in Colorado, trying to enjoy peaceful retirement. The message was brief. What will it take for humanity to help us? Daniel stared at the message for a long time. He thought about all the meetings, all the complaints ignored, all the years of being treated as lesser. Part of him wanted to ignore the message, let Vrax feel what it was like to be dismissed. But people were dying, and despite everything, Daniel still believed in trying to do the right thing. He typed a simple response. Acknowledgement and accountability. The reply came quickly. Explain. Acknowledge that the Council was wrong in how they treated humanity. Take responsibility for the failures that led to this crisis. Then maybe we can talk about what comes next. There was no response after that. Daniel knew why. The Council had never admitted fault in its 1,000-year history. Pride ran deep. But so did fear, and fear was growing stronger every day. 5 Council systems had fallen to the Zeltron Empire. Economic collapse was no longer a fear but a reality happening in slow motion. Supply chains broke apart. Medical facilities ran out of critical medicines. Trade networks that had existed for centuries simply stopped functioning. The Council station itself went on emergency rationing, something that had not happened since the Great War 300 years ago. Commander Vrax stood before the Council assembly, his scales pale with exhaustion. He had aged years in the past months. Behind him, the tactical display showed the Zeltron advance in brutal detail. Red markers crept closer to the Council's core systems, where billions of citizens lived and worked. We have lost, Vrax said, his voice barely a whisper. The chamber fell silent. No one had expected to hear those words from the proud Zenthari commander. Not the war, not yet. But we have lost the illusion that we can handle this alone. We need help. We need the humans. Councillor Prax stood up, his small frame shaking with anger. You would have us beg? You would have us admit weakness to a species that abandoned us? They did not abandon us, Councillor Thane said quietly. We drove them away. There is a difference. Semantics, Prax spat. No. Truth. Thane stood and walked to the center of the chamber. He was old, his movements slow, but his voice remained strong. I have reviewed the records, all of them. Every complaint humanity filed, every warning they gave, every time they asked to be heard and we dismissed them. The humans tried for 20 years to be partners with us. We treated them as servants, as tools to use when convenient and ignore when not. They were young, another counselor argued. They needed to learn their place. Their place? Thane's voice rose. Their place was alongside us as equals. Instead, we put them beneath us. We called them Deathworlders as an insult, mocked their caution as paranoia, and dismissed their intelligence as primitive thinking. And now we wonder why they left? The chamber erupted in arguments. Some counselors agreed with Thane. Others shouted him down. High Minister Sella let them argue for several minutes before calling for order. Enough, she said. Counselor Thane is right. I have also reviewed the records. The truth is uncomfortable, but it remains truth. We failed humanity. More importantly, we failed to be what the Council is supposed to be, a union of equals working for the common good. She pressed a button and the tactical display changed. Now it showed not military positions but data, medical reports, economic projections, social stability indexes. Every chart showed decline. This is what happens when pride matters more than wisdom, Sella continued. The humans brought skills we needed, knowledge we valued, perspectives we should have respected. We took all of it while giving nothing but contempt in return. Now they are gone, and we are paying the price. So we apologize and ask them to save us? Prax demanded. That solves nothing. Even if they return, nothing changes. We still failed. We still showed weakness. Yes, Sella said simply. We did. And the only way forward is to admit it, learn from it, and be better. The alternative is watching everything we built crumble, while we protect our pride. The vote to conduct a formal internal review passed by a narrow margin. For the first time in council history, they would examine their own failures publicly. It took 3 weeks to complete, and the results were damning. Junior Ambassador Peter Ross arrived at the council station to present the human perspective. He was 35, chosen specifically because he had not been part of the old guard. He represented a new generation that did not carry the bitterness of past conflicts, though he understood their cause. Peter stood before the full council assembly with documents that detailed every ignored complaint, every dismissed warning, every instance of discrimination humanity had endured. He spoke calmly, without anger, presenting facts rather than accusations. Humanity warned about the Zeltron threat 5 years ago, Peter said, highlighting a specific report. Our military analysts identified their buildup, their movements, their likely targets. We proposed defense strategies. The council rejected them as unnecessary expense. He pulled up another document. Human scientists offered medical technology that could have prevented the current healthcare crisis. The technology was tested, proven effective, and ready for implementation. It was rejected because the Council Medical Board decided it was too primitive for galactic use. The board never explained what made it primitive beyond it coming from humans. Document after document, example after example, Peter built a case not of human grievance, but of council failure. He was not asking for apology. He was simply showing what had happened and letting the council members draw their own conclusions. When he finished, the chamber was silent. Then Councillor Thane stood. I participated in the mockery, Thane admitted, his voice heavy. I remember laughing when human doctors proposed new surgical techniques. I thought they were overreaching, trying to impress us with flashy ideas. I never considered that maybe, just maybe, they knew something we did not. I never gave them the chance to prove their worth because I decided before hearing them that a young species could not teach old ones anything new. Another counselor stood, then another. One by one, members of the council admitted their part in humanity's dismissal. Not all of them. Some remained silent, unwilling to accept responsibility. But enough spoke that the pattern became clear. The problem was systemic, built into the council's culture over centuries of assuming they were the pinnacle of civilization. Commander Vrax was the last to speak. I called humans emotional, unstable, too aggressive for proper diplomacy. I see now that what I called emotion was passion. What I called instability was adaptability. What I called aggression was the willingness to act when action was needed. They brought qualities we lacked, and we punished them for it. High Minister Sella stood and addressed the assembly. The council faces a choice. We can continue as we have, pretending we are always right and everyone else must adapt to us. Or we can change. Real change, not empty promises. We can create oversight committees with real power. We can give all member species equal voice, regardless of how long they have been part of the council. We can build protections against discrimination and actually enforce them. And if we do all this, Councillor Prax asked, will the humans return? I don't know, Sella admitted, but at least we will deserve their consideration. The vote to implement reforms passed with a stronger majority than the vote to investigate. It seemed that once the council members confronted their failures, many of them genuinely wanted to do better. On Earth, Director Helen Cruz watched the council proceedings through a live feed. Her leadership council gathered around, observing the alien representatives admit to decades of mistakes. They're serious, said Governor Ryan Clark from the Luna colony. He was 40, pragmatic, and deeply skeptical of council promises. I never thought I'd see the day. Words are easy, said Security Chief Nicole West. We need to see action. Agreed, Helen said. But this is a start. More than I expected, honestly. What do we tell them? Asked Senator Patricia Vale. Helen considered carefully. Humanity had left to force this exact moment, to make the council face what they had done. But leaving had never been about revenge. It had been about respect. We tell them we see their efforts. We acknowledge the courage it took to admit fault publicly. But we also tell them that humanity will not rejoin the Council, not yet. Trust takes time to rebuild. What about the war? Ryan asked. The Zeltrons are still advancing. We'll offer humanitarian assistance, medical supplies, refugee evacuation, and we'll share intelligence about Zeltron movements. But we stay out of combat unless Council citizens are directly threatened. That's a middle ground, Patricia observed. Yes, we're not enemies, but we're not back to how things were either. We're finding a new relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Nicole leaned forward. The Mirren evacuation went well. We have 30,000 Mirren refugees in temporary housing on New Boston. They're grateful. And other small species are asking if we'll help them too. Help anyone who asks, Helen decided. We don't pick sides in the Council's war, but we protect people who need protecting. That's who we are. The message was sent to the Council the next day. Ambassador Linda Hayes delivered it personally, reading from a carefully prepared statement. The Council received it with mixed reactions. Some saw it as rejection. Others saw it as hope that eventually, humanity might consider partnership again. Councillor Thane saw it as exactly what humanity intended. A door left open, but not wide. An invitation to prove the reforms were real. A test of whether the Council could truly change. That night, Thane sat in his quarters and wrote a personal message to Daniel Price. It was not official business, just one old diplomat to another, acknowledging the pain caused and the work ahead. Daniel received the message at his home in Colorado. He read it twice, then walked out onto his porch to watch the sunset over the mountains. The sky turned orange and purple, beautiful and peaceful. He thought about the future, about whether the Council could really change, about whether humanity would ever trust them again. He did not have answers, but he had something he had not felt in years. Hope. High Minister Sella stood before the broadcast cameras, knowing that billions of beings across Council space would hear her words. She had spent 3 days writing the speech, revising every sentence until it said exactly what needed to be said. No diplomatic language. No careful phrasing that could be interpreted multiple ways. Just truth. Citizens of the Galactic Council, she began, I speak to you today to acknowledge failures that can no longer be ignored. For 20 years, humanity served as members of this council. They brought innovation, courage, and dedication to our common goals. In return, we gave them disrespect, dismissal, and discrimination. She paused, letting the words settle. This was not the action of a few individuals. It was systemic. It was cultural. It was wrong. On behalf of the Galactic Council, I formally apologize to humanity for how we treated them. We ignored their expertise while benefiting from their work. We mocked their caution while dismissing their warnings. We took their contributions for granted while never offering the respect they earned. The broadcast continued for 10 minutes. Sella detailed specific failures, the rejected medical technology, the ignored security warnings about the Zeltrons, the 200 complaints that were filed away and forgotten. She did not excuse these actions. She simply acknowledged they happened and took responsibility. The Council is implementing reforms, Sella said near the end. Independent oversight, equal voting rights for all members, formal protections against discrimination with real enforcement power. These changes will not fix what was broken overnight, but they are a commitment to being better than we were. She looked directly into the camera. To humanity, we say this. We understand why you left. We understand if you do not trust our promises. Trust must be earned through actions, not words. We only ask that you watch what we do and judge us by whether we keep these commitments. The Council needs to earn back your consideration, and we are prepared to do that work however long it takes. The broadcast ended. Sella sat in the silence of the studio, exhausted and uncertain if her words would matter, but she had done what she could. The rest was up to time and action. On Earth, Director Helen Cruz gathered her leadership council for the final time on this issue. They had debated for weeks about how to respond to the Council's reforms and apology. Now they needed to decide. Lieutenant Governor Ryan Clark spoke first. The reforms look real. They've created the Oversight Committee with representatives from small species, not just the old powers. They've given equal votes to everyone. They've fired 3 counselors who were caught discriminating against younger species. That's more than symbolic action. But the war continues, Security Chief Nicole West added. The Zeltrons have slowed their advance, but they still hold 5 systems. The Council is losing. Eventually, they'll ask for military help, and we'll have to decide if we're willing to fight for them. Not for them, Senator Patricia Vale corrected. With them, as partners if it comes to that. Helen listened to all perspectives before speaking. I think we send Ambassador Linda Hayes back to the Council with a proposal. We won't rejoin as members, not yet, but we will enter into a partnership agreement. Limited cooperation on specific issues where our interests align. We help with the refugee crisis. We provide medical supplies to systems in need. We share intelligence about the Zeltron Empire. And if civilians are directly threatened, we reserve the right to intervene for humanitarian reasons. What about military alliance? Ryan asked. We leave that question open. If the Council proves they've truly changed, if they treat us as equals, then maybe we consider it, but that's a decision for later. The vote was unanimous. Ambassador Linda Hayes received her instructions and departed for the Council station the next day. Linda was 42, a career diplomat who had spent years working on trade agreements before the Council withdrawal. She understood negotiation, compromise, and the importance of clear communication. She also understood that this mission was about more than politics. It was about whether two civilizations could find a way to work together after trust had been broken. She met with High Minister Sela in a private conference room. Just the two of them, no assistants or advisors. The room was simple, with a table, 2 chairs, and a window showing the stars beyond. Ambassador Hayes, Sela said. Thank you for coming. Minister, Linda replied. I've come to discuss the possibility of partnership between humanity and the Council. Not membership, partnership. I understand the distinction. Linda laid out the terms. Humanitarian cooperation, information sharing, limited trade agreements with fair terms for both sides. The Council would recognize human sovereignty and independence. Humanity would offer assistance where possible without obligation. And military cooperation? Sela asked. That depends on whether the reforms hold, on whether the Council proves it can treat humanity as equals. We're not ruling it out. We're not committing to it either. We're leaving the door open. Sela nodded slowly. That seems fair. More than fair considering how we treated you. They talked for 3 hours, working out details and addressing concerns. By the end, they had the framework of an agreement. It would be formalized over the coming weeks, but the foundation was solid. As Linda prepared to leave, Sela stopped her. May I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you think humanity will ever truly forgive us? Linda considered the question carefully. Forgiveness takes time. Trust has to be rebuilt through consistent action, not grand gestures. Some humans will forgive quickly. Others may never forget what happened. But I think most of us are willing to see if the Council can be different than it was. That's not forgiveness yet, but it's a start. Meanwhile, Admiral Karen Lee received new orders from Earth. Her fleet was to conduct a military operation, but not the kind anyone expected. The Zeltrons had pushed deep enough that civilian populations were now in direct danger. A colony world called Haven Station held 2 million people, mostly refugees from earlier attacks. The Zeltron fleet was approaching, and the Council forces could not get there in time. Karen's fleet could. They were closer, faster, and better equipped for the kind of rapid strike needed. But engaging the Zeltrons meant entering the war, crossing a line Earth had been careful to avoid. She read her orders twice to make sure she understood. Earth was not joining the war. They were protecting civilians from immediate threat. One operation, one battle, then withdrawal. Clear objective, clear limits. All ships prepare for combat jump, Karen ordered. We're going to Haven Station. Her fleet arrived 6 hours before the Zeltron forces. They immediately began evacuating civilians, loading transport ships as fast as possible. But there were too many people and not enough time. When the Zeltron fleet emerged from their jump, half the population was still on the station. Karen positioned her warships between the Zeltrons and Haven Station. She opened a communication channel to the enemy commander. This is Admiral Karen Lee of the human fleet. We are conducting humanitarian evacuation operations. Do not interfere. The Zeltron commander responded with what sounded like laughter. You are not Council members. This is not your concern. Move aside or be destroyed. The people on that station are protected by humanitarian law. We will defend them. Then you will die. The Zeltron ships advanced. Karen gave the order to engage. The battle lasted 6 hours. Human ships moved with speed and precision that surprised the Zeltron forces. They were used to fighting council ships that followed predictable patterns. Human tactics were different. Aggressive, creative, constantly adapting. Deathworld thinking applied to space combat. Karen's flagship, the Swift Justice, took heavy damage but held the line. Her other ships darted in and out, hitting the Zeltron vessels with precision strikes that targeted weapons and engines rather than trying to destroy them completely. The goal was not to win the war. It was to buy time for the evacuation. When the last transport ship cleared the station, Karen ordered withdrawal. Her fleet jumped away, leaving the Zeltron forces confused and damaged. Haven Station was empty, its people saved, but the strategic situation unchanged. The Zeltron still controlled the territory, but humanity had made it clear they would protect civilians regardless of politics. The battle made news across the galaxy. Council species saw that humans had intervened when people needed help, even though they owed the Council nothing. The action said more than any diplomatic statement could. On the Arkelian homeworld, Councillor Thane walked through his private garden with Daniel Price. The retired human ambassador had accepted Thane's invitation to visit, a gesture of potential reconciliation. They walked in comfortable silence for a while before Thane spoke. "Your Admiral Lee's action at Haven Station, that was not required by the partnership agreement?" "No," Daniel agreed. "It was not. But it was the right thing to do, even though it risked your people, especially because of that. Humanity does not help others only when it's convenient or profitable. We help because we can, because we choose to, because protecting people matters more than protecting our pride." Thane stopped walking and looked at Daniel directly. "Do you think humans will ever forgive us, truly?" Daniel gave the same answer Linda Hayes had given Sella. "Forgiveness takes time. Trust has to be rebuilt. But I'm hopeful. The fact that we're having this conversation,